All right. What is up, everybody? Feels amazing to get started on another stream. It's been a couple weeks, obviously, because of worlds and a lot of other things. Been a very busy past month in general. And um I think this is gonna be an important one. Uh just to set a little bit of context, if you're looking for something like doom and gloom, this isn't it. If you're looking for, I don't know, I think that I learned something about the game of Flesh and Blood that I think, if shared with other players, can make them better players. And that's the whole reason that I started streaming, was to do just that. It does have to do a lot with the way that Flesh and Blood is designed as a game, and I think I've stumbled onto something that's very interesting that deserves a big discussion within the community, and not in a negative way. It's just we have to provide a feedback loop, right? It's very important. And it's very important how we do it as well. And so I think that, I don't know, maybe I'm exaggerating a little bit, but I think this is going to be one of the most important streams that I do in regards to, I really think that there's something here. And like I said, it's not bad. It's not a bad thing. Uh, it's just a lot of data points are pointing towards something. And it's very interesting or worthwhile to talk about it. A couple of things that we have to take care of course, before we jump into the main topic, which is going to be kind of aggro versus control. And is there an imbalance? And that's going to be the main topic. We'll hop in like 5 minutes. I just wanted to say a couple things. Bums you didn't get to go to Worlds this year. I'd love to meet you. Kevin, I hate that I missed it. Um, I really, my favorite place to go to events is anywhere in Europe or on that part of the world in Asia or anywhere around there, just because I don't get to do it a lot, and uh, you get to see people that you haven't met, or you get to see a larger collection of our community in one place. Typically, because worlds and pro tours and stuff like that typically generate more a higher volume of players. So you just get to see everybody instead of the people that you kind of always see grinding the US circuit or whatever you want to call it. So I really hate that I missed that event. But first and foremost, I want to congratulate our new world champion on an amazing job on how they played. It was like very, very well done. Uh, and I also want to say congratulations to LSS on a. I wasn't there, obviously, but from what I saw, I was basically glued to the screen during all the coverage or most of the coverage, and so I think LSS knocked it out of the park. Of course, Ethan and Nathan, shout out to them for doing an amazing job on the coverage. I mean, it was spectacular. Um, there was that one little internet hiccup at the beginning during like round 1 or whatever, but then after that, it was like smooth. It was so smooth. Such a great job. I think I saw somewhere on Twitter where like the longest time without active content was 3 minutes. That is just I LSS obviously made the correct choice to 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 go with Ethan to provide that coverage. I mean, it was so well done. The casting team did an amazing job. Honkage, Sam, all the casters did an amazing job on the coverage. It was really, really well done. And everything that I saw from the outside pointed to it being a very, very successful event. And that's something that shouldn't be skimmed over or underappreciated. So I just wanted to say congratulations to LSS for for a very successful world championship, and that's important. Those things are very, very important. And yeah, is there anything else? I think that's all the household items that I wanted to cover. Kind of get out of the way. It was just a really good weekend for Flesh and Blood, I think. Even with the wreck that is CYB on Twitter, I think overall is a very, very successful weekend for Flesh and Blood. We have a question in chat about exactly that. What's your opinion about the stand that there are Poison the Well and Gravekeeping? CYB shouldn't be banned. My I think that CYB is a perfectly balanced card. I don't think it's too strong from a competitive standpoint because of mainly those cards. I do think that it's a little bit toxic. I think that it's bad for viewership. Watching the finals in the first match of the top 8 was extremely boring. Um, it was not it was not exciting. There was no other than the CNC that blew up the poison well. I can't remember anything about the match if I'm being 100% honest. So there's that negative aspect, right? And if a card is balanced but produces a not very good play experience, right? Um, if it's you know creating toxic situations, then maybe I don't think it's broken. I just don't understand the purpose it serves existing. That's the way that I'll put it. And if you can't come up with a very, very good answer for why it exists when there are negatives associated with the card, then it's got to go. I think it's that simple. I combat CYB with a game plan, not a specific card. I mean, there's lots of ways to combat it, which is why I think it's a balanced card. I don't think that's the issue. I think unfun play patterns and making events last 3 hours past. Give you some context. The battle harden that was attached to the worlds. One of the semifinals games in one of the quarterfinal games was 2 hours long. It was explained to me that it was, more of a player taking a long time and not the fact that it involved a CYB deck. But then the the CYB deck went to the semis. There was a concession there, so it cut the game short. It was like a win, like the person was going to win, but they just realized it and then they conceded probably a good half hour before the game would have actually naturally ended. And then the finals were a full concession. So the event went about an hour and a half past when the event hall closed, and there were two concessions at two levels in the top 8. So if it would have actually played out in its entirety, every single turn of Flesh and Blood, it would have went over by 3 hours. And that's not sustainable. They were lucky that the venue let them stay. They literally could have just told them. Most places in the US probably would have just told them to go eat grass, and just literally kick them out. In fact, that's what happened in Atlanta. We went 30 minutes over, and they literally had to play the finals in in the hallway, when, the Atlanta PTI event, not the Battle Hard. Yeah. So, that's my opinion on CYB. I'm not gonna spend too much time on it. So, let's go ahead. Let me read the last couple things in chat. Best of one format makes it hard to bring specific CYB. Yeah, there's also that Yu-Gi-Oh aspect where it's like do you guess right? And I'm not a huge fan of that. It's not something that I enjoy playing fatigue games. I enjoy beating fatigue. It's kind of how I've earned a little bit of my reputation, and um, but I understand the frustration with a lot of people in regards to that type of game style. In a game where honestly there are a lot of broken things, CYB is just one more thing. That's a fair point. It's a fair point. Sensei's Divining top issue from where it was in standard. Rounds lasted too long. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Exactly the kind of thing I'm talking about. So let's get into what I'm claiming is important to talk about. And that is aggro versus control. Is there an imbalance? And my idea on this discussion, and chat, I'm going to be honest with you. We're probably going to be here a minute. This is going to go deep. We're going to bring out the graphs, some math. We're going to go into design principles behind what I think they are in the game. We're going in. Okay. Um, so if you have a question, it's very important that you mention it when I'm talking about the subject, or else we're going to get lost in the sauce. Okay. So if you do have any questions or comments or anything you want to throw in, uh, just do that faster if you don't mind. Also, nothing political in the chat, period. And end of discussion on that. Uh, so let's dig into it. So I was watching the game. How this whole thing became a thought was I was watching the finals match of the last calling that Pablo Pintor won. I don't remember what calling it was. I think it was Leon, where he was playing Enigma that did not have CYB, just regular Enigma, and he was playing against Azalea, if I'm not mistaken. I was watching that game, and it was a good game. And I remember sitting there thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, the Azalea's in a good position. All they have to do is kind of not brick. And then I looked over at Pablo and I was like, Pablo's also in a really good position. All he needs to do is not, and I blinked. I paused and I thought for a second and I said, what does Pablo not want to see when he draws the cards off of his deck? The better question is, does Pablo actually give a shit about the next 4 cards in his deck? And the conclusion that I came to is I don't think he does. Are there better cards? Of course. Maybe an extra D react, or maybe not a D react if he has Remorseless, or whatever the case may be. You know, there's that 0.001 chance that he draws like 3 Transcend cards. Obviously, he doesn't want that. But the texture of his next hand, it doesn't matter. Pablo's win con did not involve what cards came up next. It just didn't matter. Or at least I couldn't come up with like a real good reason on why. The point I'm trying to make is he couldn't brick because there was nothing he was trying to get or really trying to accomplish, although that's not entirely correct because he was just trying to not take damage. And I thought to myself, I said, on one side of the table, you have one person that is holding their breath every time they draw a new hand, hoping that they get a synergy driven combination of cards off the top of their deck. And on the other side of the table, they don't really give a shit what they draw. And I asked myself the question, I said, why would I ever sit on the aggro side of that table? And that brought me to ask the fundamental question that people really roasted me on Twitter about aggro being at a fundamental disadvantage in the game of Flesh and Blood ever since Belittle was banned. But I can't just say that because of one game. One game does not matter. One hero, one class, none of that matters. I have a background in data science, and you really have to prove things in sample sizes and you have to do it a very correct way. Now, anything revolving around TCGs, unless you're the actual company running things, the data is it's pretty limited, but we can do the best that we possibly can, right? So, I then presented the hypothesis, if you want to put it that way. Why would you ever play an aggro deck? Why would you ever take that risk to do that? And so I started with that question and I said, okay, well, I'm basically stating that there is a fundamental design, and I'm not going to call it an error. It's just an aspect of the design that would favor anybody that likes to block. I'm not even going to break it up into mid range, control, whatever. Just anybody that likes to use some of their cards defensively. Okay. Which is basically the definition of anything that is not aggro. And so basically just thought back on the evolution of the game, right? Because if there was a design bias, if you will, toward a certain aspect of the game, it would kind of rear its head from day one, right? Because it would be baked in, right? And it would just kind of either be minimized from that point on or amplified. And so I went back to the first set, and that's where we're going to start. I'm just going to walk you through my whole process on how I came about this, the questions I asked myself, the things I had to prove. And then we're going to spend the last little bit of it just kind of trying to prove it wrong. Because I like to look at everything from as many angles as I possibly can. So, what I did was I went to the very beginning of the game. I said that if there is a fundamental advantage of blocking in Flesh and Blood, what aspects of design would point to that being true? And I immediately, within 30 seconds, found my answer. I looked at the first 8 heroes of the game, and every one of their entire class design is designed to combat overblocking. Every one of them. Okay? Let me walk you through it. Bravo has dominate on his hero ability. Intimidate. We all know how intimidate affects blocking. But you might say, what about Katsu? And I would beg the question, what about Kodachi's? Kodachi's is literally low to the ground, hard to block, hard to extract value from blocking. All of these heroes. Odori, how about if you block, I get extra effects in the reaction step? Her whole hero design is to punish blocking. So I said from that moment, I said, this is too clear. It can't continue, right? There's no way that this trend, it has to be like an anomaly, right? It has to be. And so I went to Azalea, and here we are. Dominate, right? We see the keyword dominate. And then we have our first incorporation of split damage, which is evasion. And then we have full evasion in the version of Kano, right? Just via arcane damage. Completely changing the way you use cards defensively. And then you have the one hero that doesn't have anything, but she has this little card called Induction Chamber that literally says, "Oh, you're gonna sit back and block? Hold my beer," right? And she's just gonna throw down a bunch of items and literally fatigue you out. And that's why once Crucible of War came out, she literally ran the game. Okay? So for the first 8 heroes of the this is my theory. I have never had a conversation with James White in my life. I would love to one day, but I never have. And I think that after they played James White and whoever created the game with him, after he played 400 games, I think he started to realize that the more defensive he was, the more games he was winning. And that's why this shit is baked into every one of these heroes that started the game of Flesh and Blood. And I think that's also where the Arsenal came from. I think that the Arsenal was like a tool. Okay. So we have that data point, right? We don't know if it's true, but it logically makes sense. We can logically come to a conclusion that the first 8 heroes, not designed around devaluing blocking, but it's very clear that they needed a lot to dissuade people from doing so in excess. Okay. So we have that argument, but now we have to kind of prove it. What we have to do is we have to look at all the game systems in Flesh and Blood, and we have to find the one that is causing this anomaly, right? Why is blocking so much better than using your cards offensively and relying on synergies, right? That is the claim that we are trying to make. What is the fundamental aspect? And I think it comes down to what is actually my favorite design mechanic in the game is what's causing this. And that is the aspect of Flesh and Blood of where you draw up 4 cards every turn. Is what's causing that is the design mechanic that is actively supporting the claim of aggro being at a disadvantage at the inception of the game. Now, we're still not there yet. That's an idea that would support it. How? Why does drawing 4 cards every turn kind of, why does that give an advantage toward people that want to block? And this is my theory. If you have Okay, let's look at what aggression looks like in the game of Flesh and Blood. 95% of your aggressive tools that you have access to in the game of Flesh and Blood come within your class. They do not come from the generic card pool. Okay? You have a couple tools like Rabble and Snatch, right? But everything else, it's coming from your class or talent card pool. Now, one thing that class and talent card pools in regards to aggression require is synergy. And that is a great way to balance the game. Because you can't just let everybody throw up their cards offensively. It becomes very boring. It becomes just the slap game we see on TV or whatever. And right, it's just whoever falls over first. So it's good design. I'm not hating on it. None of this is hating on anything. I'm just trying to draw a logical conclusion. And So if you need a synergy to be aggressive, if we can come, let's define that because that's very important. If we look at Viscerai or any Rune Blade, you need a healthy mixture of attacks and non-attacks. You don't want too many of one. You don't want too many of the other. What's another aggressive uh, deck? Mechanologists. They have to have all class cards to work. Literally. Okay? Azalea, you have to have a ratio mixture of non-attacks, pumps, and your arrows. Right? Fi, you need starters. You need blues for your weapons. You need all those things, right? There are ratios that you have to acquire to have the optimal hand, right? To extract the most value from your hand. So, my theory is that because in the game of Flesh and Blood, you draw 4 cards every turn, and the sample size of your hand is relatively small, it's just 4 cards, that it's unreliable to keep drawing into synergies. Whereas you can just block and not need to draw into any synergies. Now, you might counter that argument with well, that's what the arsenal is for. And you would be 100% correct. But let's take a step back. Every single day that goes by, the arsenal is harder and harder to use for synergies. We're talking Plow Under, Dissolve Reality, of course, the obvious CNC. There's that new Draconic card that's blowing up your arsenal. Breaking Point. They're coming out with a lot of tool. They printed 3 attacks that flip over your arsenal, and if it's a certain thing, blow it up, right? Your arsenal is becoming more and more contested every single day. And once again, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If anything, it's a very good thing because it induces interaction, which is what we want in card games. Exactly what we're trying to do. Okay? So, we've basically defined that for aggro decks to work, they have to leverage synergies that are built into the class/talent card pools. And it's very difficult to consistently draw into synergies when the arsenal is heavily contested. Not all the time, but sometimes, right? And sometimes you can still brick with an arsenal, right? Like that's not unheard of. There's a lot of Aurora hands where, whether you have an embodiment, either you make the embodiment, don't need it, or you couldn't make one and you needed it, whatever the case may be, right? And so that is my theory, is that, and we can even compare that to a game like Flesh and Blood, or not. Obviously, we're talking about Flesh and Blood. We can compare it to a game like Magic. In a game like Magic, since you're drawing 7 or 8 cards from the get-go, it's much easier to acquire synergies because you are getting more options to look at. Now, obviously, you see way more cards over the game of Flesh and Blood, but other than the arsenal and your pitch, there is no relation from one turn cycle to the other, right? Unless it involves board state. And so to further the point that I think this was recognized very early in the development of the game, I think this is the reason that Illusionist was created. I think that there needed to be a safety valve for defensive strategies. And I don't think that's groundbreaking, right? We're not we're not discovering gold here, right? Like we know that that's what Illusionist is good at. But it's very important to kind of draw the line at where we think why it exists, right? And why, why we have one class that involves, establishing a board state way more than any other class in the game. Uh, and so, just to come a little bit full circle, right? Let me reestablish where we currently are. I watched the game. I said, why would you ever play aggro? Right? Why would you take that risk? And so I looked at the early designing of the game, and every single hero from the first two sets has a major aspect of them that really disincentivizes blocking. So I came to the conclusion that blocking on average is the best strategy in Flesh and Blood. Overall, it's obviously not absolute, but from an overall percent, like if you play 100 games, 55 of them may favor decks that block, right? And with that being said, we have to further prove the point, because in comes the next problem. And the Twitter was very quick to remind me of this fact, but let me get caught up in chat before we move to the next part. I think this is a good time to do that. He's spitting. Are we talking about how CYB breaks fundamentals game? Oh, we already covered CYB a little bit, but it'll come back up in the conversation for sure. Went through it already, regardless of the changes. Preset breaks fundamentals game. It's a fair point. Fair point. Blocking almost always holds more value. I mean, that's it. That is it. Bolton needs yellows. Exactly. Exactly. What you're saying is encapsulated in Heavy Kasai versus Victor. Kasai has so many different things that she's trying to do. Synergies, and Victor just says no. Yep. Great point. So every intellect we add, the better it becomes for aggro, not just linearly, but exponentially. If you increase intellect, it becomes easier to draw into synergies, right? And this can be proven in Azalea, right? Azalea is technically the closest we can get, because she doesn't get 5 cards, but she gets to look at 5 cards with the cross traps, right? And that's why she is, from an aggro basis, she is very consistent, right? Don't forget that in MTG, third of the cards are lands. So they don't really help, but that's why, I mean, that is true, right? But that would be, all you're doing is instead of drawing a blue every turn, you're trying to draw 2 to 3 blues at one time in Magic. So it's the same thing as blue pitch. You're just doing it all at once. That's the only difference. It's the same thing though. Thought on the moon landing. I think if the issue you're talking about were valid, Tekla would be the strongest deck in the game. Okay, so let's pump the brakes a little bit. We're built. I'm walking you through the evolution of my idea. I have not proven that that aggro is at a disadvantage. We're not even halfway into it. I'm telling you, chat. This goes deep. Okay, and we've already talked about fundamental design of Flesh and Blood. Like we're going in. So yeah, we're gonna do all the comparisons with like blocking decks and like how they're bad, and then we're gonna talk about aggro decks and how they literally ruin the game. We're gonna talk about all these things. All these things. If all cards attack for 3 and block for 3, then blocking is king. I feel like Ellis has made aggro strong enough to overcome defensive tools. This runs on me is insane. Yep. KO's in his best deck, respective air. Yeah, we're gonna get into all that. I promise. I promise. I'm not gonna give you guys that and not remember chain. Come on, come on. Okay. So we just walked back the entire thought process. Okay. So now that I have like an idea that maybe aggro is at a slight disadvantage based on the design mechanics of Flesh and Blood, and I have a couple good data points that kind of point toward that being true. We have not proven it. It is not proved in any way, shape, form, or fashion. But we have something that says, okay, you're on to something. So now the next step, if you do it right, is you try to prove it wrong. It's the most important step. And so I think to myself, how in the world can aggro be at a disadvantage when Chain existed, Pre-Errata Briar existed, Casino Starvo existed, right? Lexi List existed, Zen. All of these heroes, I don't want to say broke the game, but I'm going to say broke the game. I mean, let's be honest. And maybe broke's not the right word, but it fundamentally changed the design principles going forward in the game, which I would consider breaking. So, how can those two things be true? Because they kind of don't make sense. So we have to start. Now we need numbers. We need a way to represent which one's right. Okay? And this wouldn't be a Nathan Crawford stream if we didn't bring out the numbers in the graphs. So let's head on over to the Excel sheet. The Excel sheet. We're going in. We are going in. Where is it? Where is it? Okay. Here we go, chat. Oh, and also, one quick thing before we move on into this, because I just threw like belittle at you for like no real reason. How did I draw the line at belittle? Why did it even come up in the conversation? Well, I asked myself when I was kind of, running through the ideas of, well, how can I disprove that aggro is, actually at an advantage or maybe even tied with Dex Up Block? I was like, who's winning these top tier events? The Pro Tours, the Worlds, right? And we have the decks that won, Azuri, definitely a mid-range or control deck, depending on how you classify it. Definitely not aggro. We had a more defensive-oriented Dromai, right? Fates, Sinks, Sigils, right? All those defensive tools. I would consider that a very mid-rangey deck. It has an aggro element to it, but the deck loved to block. It loved to block, right? And then Fi, of course, won Worlds, right? I think from a statistical advantage, Icelander was the best deck at that tournament. I just think that that's how the cookie crumbled. So, I asked myself, oh, and before that, Michael Fang won on Oldham. I asked myself, when was the last time an aggro deck won a tier 3, or is that tier 4? I forget. A top tier event. When's the last time when's the last time an aggro deck won a tier 4 event where it was pretty much undisputedly the top deck? I would say that Fi, when it won, was probably the 3rd or 4th best deck. Like it's kind of down there. It was quite the surprise. And the answer is Matthew Folks, Pro Tour 2. Was the last time an aggro deck won when it was undisputedly one of the top 2 decks on Belittle Briar. And I said, okay, who won Pro Tour 1? Oh, it was Belittle Chain. And just to give you a little history lesson, the secret tech Pablo Pintor had that not a lot of other people had in their deck that gave him an extreme advantage in the mirror match was, you guessed it, 3 extra copies of Belittle. He was on the reds and the yellows. So that got me thinking, okay, does it have something to do with Belittle? And so, so I drew the line there. I said, okay, we have the Belittle ban. Let's look at the data on both sides of it. And chat, I found something unbelievable. Truly unbelievable. Now, let's dig into the data. Let me explain. What you see up here, this data set, I took every single top 8 placement at a calling since calling Las Vegas in 2021. The one that Prism won. Actually beat Seb in the finals. It was Tyler Horspool. When Tales of Aria came out, it was the pre-release calling. Is the one. And I took that time and took it all the way to the Belittle ban. And so that's this data set. And I took every top 8 placement and placed it in a category. Okay, as you can see, we have an aggro category, a mid-range, a control, and a combo. And we have the number of top 8 placements that it had next to it. Okay, now, also, if you haven't noticed already, there are some heroes where they are the same hero is in multiple categories. And that's because I literally went, chat, I'm not exaggerating. I went into every deck list. There's 144 here and 91 here. I dug into all 235 deck list and actively looked at their card choices to determine whether they were considered an aggro deck, a mid-range, or a control. I'll give you an example. This is Tree Frog Dash. This is regular switchboard dash, like just old school dash. And then the aggro variant is anything that has Talishar or Hanabi Blaster, is what I considered aggro dash. Okay, you also had situations like Starvo, where you had the casino variety on aggro, and then you had the control, kind of like the Michael Hamilton winning indie calling Starvo. That was what I would consider more a control Starvo. Okay. Obviously, these placements are not perfect. There's a lot of opinion in these placements. I'm going to have some people say there's no such thing as mid-range Dromai. The way I have it divvied up is if you were on Big Dragon Dromai, I put you in the mid-range category. If you were Redline, Mara Ferris style Dromai, you're in the aggro category. And I think that makes sense. Obviously, they still ran Sync and Fate and stuff like that, but like they were pretty aggressive, right? And I think it's fair to place them in that said category. So everything is kind of at a place, and I spent a long time like looking at it, not being biased whatsoever, just like literally placing stuff. I mean, even Victor, like we have the Dennis Zhang Victor right here in the control. I went that deep, and then 2 other Victors that were more traditional mid-rangey Victor. Okay. So we went and placed all of these decks and then drew a line to split them in half to show how the game is changing. Okay. So before Belittle, 59% of the top 8 placements were aggressive decks. And so on. You can see the numbers here, 24 in mid-range, 12, and then 4. It just continues to fall off in that direction. So before Belittle, it was very effective to say, and obviously this is what got banned, right? This is very easy to come to this conclusion on why they did it and whatnot. And so this is the data. And so then we go to post belittle. And I know what you're thinking. We have our answer, right? This pie chart looks like a perfectly balanced game. Aggro is always going to have a little bit of advantage because I think I don't know this. I am guessing this. Somebody please correct me in chat if I'm wrong. But in card games, I'm assuming that there is a higher player base that plays aggro decks versus slower decks. Just because of like ease of play. I think it's just a more preferred play style as a whole. That is pure speculation. I didn't play Magic back in the day. This is something that I've just observed. I think there's more aggro players than there are mid-range or control. Just holistically, right? Not by a lot, but a little, right? And so aggro is always going to have a little bit of an edge. So you might say that, Nathan, there can't be an issue with aggro because this is literally a perfect chart. It's almost in thirds. And combo is always going to be the smallest slice. That's natural because quite frankly, there's not that many combo decks, right? But I'm going to give you one statement that's going to disprove that. Okay? Here we have the section labeled Design Lessons Learned. Okay? These are how many top 8s were achieved when LSS actively said, yeah, we can't do that, or we don't want to do that, or whatever the case may be. Some indirect way they said, like, yeah, that's not okay. I'm going to tell you these ones right now. This is 3 Stubby Hammer-Fi top 8s from that one event in Europe. I forget what city it was, but it was right when Fi came out and Stubby Hammers was accessible, and he just blew through a calling instantly. And then Stubby Hammers was banned the next week. That's not working, right? Then we have Chain with Seeds of Agony. 4 top 8 placements. Once again, they very quickly reeled that one back in and said, look, that's a no-go. And then we had Chain's kind of final form before he LL'd, which was still way too powerful, but we had his final form. That's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to say how many top 8s were achieved before the final form was achieved. And then Briar, we have 3 top 8s from the calling at U.S. Nationals on pre-errata Briar, because literally 2 days later, there was the errata. And then Oldham, we have 7 top 8s while he had access to Pulse and Winner's Well. Okay? So those were the design lessons learned. Now, why do I even have that? Why do I even have that listed? Well, why is that important? The reason that is important is when we come back here, and if you notice, we have 2 very distinct, very still on everybody's mind, still wound hasn't healed yet. Design lessons learned. And the part that I want to present that disproves the fact that this chart is a perfectly balanced game lies here. Let me ask you the question. Let's look at Zen Nationals meta, right? So Zen had 9 top 8s, 9 of them, before the book burning. is what we'll call it. That huge ban announcement where all the Art of War was Bonds was completely banned and Art of War was banned, right? He had 9 top 8s. In that meta, let's just use the US Nationals calling meta. What deck, what aggro deck had the ability to step up and take Zin's representation? The answer is there wasn't. If Zen did not exist in that meta, Enigma literally would have ran wild. Okay. So we can logically draw the conclusion without any bias that if there wasn't the circumstance of, I hate saying this term, breaking the game with this hero, we would have less than 9 aggro decks in this list, which reduces this percentage, right? I would make the argument of to the order of magnitude of half or maybe even a little bit more. Azalea is a good deck, but I would beg the question that if Enigma was able to tech toward Azalea more and not worry about Zen, I don't think that's a valid point. I understand your thought process. Like Azalea is a deck that could step up and do that, but I don't think it changes the power dynamic specific, especially because New was still running around, right? And it was a very dangerous. And I know Azalea ultimately won the calling, but we can't just take the winners and draw conclusions, right? Um, so I think that less aggro decks would have top aided if Zen came out the gate balanced. That is my statement. And I'm going to say the exact same statement, right? Now this one's a little touchy, right? LSS made a statement that they wanted to be more aware on start and play, stay and play mechanics, and that it was very important on action point economy and things of that nature. And I don't know this. I don't know the answer to this question because I can't recall if it was ever asked. Um, it is my personal belief that maybe if you were to ask somebody at LSS, does the card Voltaire belong in the classic constructed game of Flesh and Blood? I think their answer would be no. I think it does not belong from a balance perspective. Um, and I think that they did not ban it because then Lexi just sits there at 900 for forever. And wouldn't it have just been KO again? Absolutely not. KO at his peak, luckily we can scroll up, right? KO is what a healthy. This is that data that I put together on Zen on why he should get banned right before he got banned. Or he didn't get banned, but the book burning. KO was much worse of an aggro deck, even though I consider it a mid-range deck, than Lexi or Zen. Not even close. I have the data here if you wanna check it out. Astronomically worse. All you have to do is look at his warrior matchup, and that's all the information you need to know. Period. That's all you need to know. Simple as that. Okay. So, my statement that I wanted to double down on is much of this Lexi and Zen share of top 8s in the aggro category would not exist if the game didn't need bans or LL to do the heavy lifting. I don't know. There's a more political way to say that because I'm not trying to call anybody out. It's not the goal here. I'm just trying to get the data in the best situation that it can be, because we can't just make a pie chart and take it as law. So therefore, if we can logically draw the conclusion that, let's say, half of these are not here, we have 28. If we lose 14, right? So it'd be 53 minus 14 would come out to 39. But to be honest, that 19, like your average deck was like Dromai. So if you change these numbers to 5, then you have 14 in excess here and you have like 4 in excess here. So it would be closer to like 19. You would almost have to take 20 off if those heroes came into the game, quote unquote, balanced. Under the premise that KO is the best place an aggro deck could be from a design perspective. And so that would knock it all, if you took almost 20 off, that'd knock it all the way down to 33. And now, once you factor in my theory, once again, I don't know if I'm correct, that more players play aggro, there's no way that aggro would be at a 9% disadvantage in top 8 conversions compared to the other archetypes. And once again, this is not perfect. We are guessing. We don't know if there would have been another aggro deck that could have stepped up. I mean, this is all speculation. I'm just taking the historical trend of aggro decks, finding an average, and applying it. Right? You have a bunch of 1s, a bunch of 4s, a bunch of 3s, a bunch of 2s, and I'm just applying an average, which is still not correct because it could just be redistributed. I don't know. But what I do know is that if Zen and Lexi were balanced on release, or in Lexi's case, on the release of Outsiders, they would not have fucking 9 and 19 top 8s from the belittle ban period to now. That I can tell you with 100% certainty. Because we have the proof in the pudding right now. Zen got 1 top 8 in 3 event weekend, or technically 2 event weekend, where these 9 top 8s are only literally like 3 events, maybe 4. Like, he was screaming out the gate. So he was literally producing numbers, I mean, 6 to 5 times faster than what he's doing from a mathematical perspective now. We're at a very small sample size. It doesn't mean it's not a de facto answer or anything like that. But I can promise you the numbers would be lower. Where those numbers go, I don't know. What I can tell you is that if Lexi was tamed, Briar would have been a lot better, and then Briar would have LL'd immediately instead of hanging out at 990 for forever. So Briar would have been gone. That's 1 less aggro to take a cut out of the pie, right? And so, I mean, she really get a piece of the pie either. She got 1 top 8. Literally, that's it. And that was Tart Patel at Indianapolis. So once again, this is not including any split format events. These are only events where all of it is CC, because those are the best data points that are not construed. Like, you could say KO was like dominating because there was like 4 in the top 8 at LA, but they did dog shit in CC. They just 6-0'd the draft. Most of them. I don't know about all of them, but I remember Ethan saying something along those lines. So if we can come to the conclusion that that's what's happening, aggro is at an, what, 8% disadvantage? 7? 7.5% disadvantage? with it being played theoretically more, I think that's a disadvantage, right? Now, on my tweet, everybody just assumed this statement. I did not say on the tweet, aggro is dog shit in the game of Flesh and Blood. No, I said that I have a theory that states there is a fundamental disadvantage. I didn't say it was major. I didn't say that aggro was dog shit. None of that. I just said that there was a disadvantage. And here it's approximately 5 to 7% based on these conversion numbers, not factoring in the higher play rate. Maybe it goes to 7 and 8 once you factor that in, but that's unproven. I don't know that. LSS probably knows that, and that data would be amazing. If I could get access to the LSS data, oh my God, I'd never turn the camera off. Okay. So, with that being said, the next point that I took was, so we basically had pre-belittle, we had aggro absolutely dominating to an underdog. Okay. But we're not quite proven yet. Are there any other aspects in the game that would support this argument that ever since belittle was banned, aggro has kind of been lackluster? Is there any other data point that we can obtain? And so, chat, we started digging. We started thinking outside the box. We started thinking about what are some things that we can kind of put together to kind of support that argument? Or, more importantly, maybe disprove it, right? And so on we go to the next set of data, and that would be here. There we go. Okay. So let's go through the ban and suspended announcements from belittle onward in a row and kind of take a mental note. Are they actively banning cards that benefit aggro decks, mid-range decks, combo decks, or control decks? Okay. This is the belittle ban. Obviously, they hit winners well at the same time, ice, Amulet of Ice, and hypothermia. So now we're going to look forward. We had the bullseye bracers. Everybody can come to the conclusion that's an aggro ban toward Lexing. Okay. Those of you who don't know, this is where the abacus came from in the background. Funny story. Berserk, I think, is irrelevant in the context of what we are discussing. That was design mishap prevention, along with Crown of Seeds. Crown of Seeds was not playable at the time it was banned. So this ban announcement, as far as the data we are trying to accrue, completely irrelevant. Completely irrelevant. Bonds of Ancestry, blue and yellow. That is an aggro ban. Period. Done. Next. Then we have what we make banned. No, we make this. We have the book burning, right? And every one of these cards I consider an aggro or combo card. Okay? The only thing that is possible to argue, I think, is cash in. Cash in Kasai could have been like a mid-rangey tool, or maybe Olympia, something. It's a bit of a stretch, but like maybe. You know, it was still an aggro tool. The most relevant place that card found itself in the most recent meta was Cash in Viscerai. Which, lo and behold, that's an aggro deck. So we have 5 ban announcements. All of the hits in every single one of them do not touch mid-range or control. Only combo or aggro. And when I say combo, I mean like, Tome of Divinity and maybe Tome of Firebrand, although that card never really saw play, uh, and whatnot. Okay. But is there another data point that we can maybe grab to all this data came from single format, nothing split format. We're talking all the callings that were classic constructed plus the first Pro Tour because it was all classic constructed. Do we think Mercy could have won the finals with some tighter play? Maybe. I mean, once again, I don't think that this whole thing didn't come about because it actually came about from the Pablo game at a calling, not the World Championship. Although it did make it a good time to talk about it. I will admit that. Do you think that belittle is still a problem post book burning? We're gonna get into that. Okay. So we've basically drawn the conclusion, or we're trying to prove our statement. And we found that the tendencies of the ban and suspended announcement was to take tools away from aggro. Now, I don't know how relevant of a point that is because this was obviously a concession. Look, we can't take Voltaire, so take this. This was like, Zen's a problem. More to do with Zen than like, I think these are corrective design I don't want to say mistakes, lessons learned. And belittle is like an aggro ban, period. There's no way to sugarcoat it. Is it a lessons learned? Of course. It's a really good card. Too good of a card. But it is what it is. So then I wanted to move on to my next point. So I went through, literally, I'm not kidding. I went through every fucking generic card twice and basically tried to prove a point on it, whether it was aggro, mid-range, control. And I split it into two categories. I said, let's put everything in aggro if it's generic, and then everything that's not aggro that's generic in another card pool. Okay. And let me ask you a question, chat. I'm going to ask you a question. Please put it in chat if you think you know the answer. When was the last generic aggro staple, keyword staple, heavily played in several different decks throughout the course of its existence? When was the last aggro staple printed in Flesh and Blood that is legal in the classic constructed format? What's the answer to that question, chat? I'm going to see if somebody knows. The answer to this question is actually going to blow you away. You're not going to believe it. You're going to think I'm lying. I don't consider Weakest Link an aggro tool. I consider Weakest Link a mid-range control tool to target aggro. Nobody's got it yet. See, we make best. That's why you're the GOAT. That's it. The answer is Arcane Rising Ravenous Rabble. The second set in Flesh and Blood. That was the last playable and classic constructed staple. Exude, kind of. It was close, right? But Briar played it as like a sideboard piece, and same for Aurora. I think that's a bit of a stretch, although it's like close. I'll kind of like ballpark, and then Is like the same thing, but even to a lesser extent than Exude. But the rest, like a true, a true aggro staple. The last, because you could make the argument premeditate, right? But we know that only goes in 2 fucking decks, right? Riptide and Azalea. Like, yes, that's in every Azalea and Riptide deck ever made on the planet. But it says generic, but is it? Like, that kind of situation, you know? That Rabble was the last one printed. Okay. Now, let's ask ourselves the same question, but let's be generous. Let's just say, ever since, or I guess, ever since the Belittle ban, what tools has mid range in control decks obtained? I hope you have a minute, chat, because we're going to be here for a second. Mid range and control decks have gotten Amnesia as a tool, Battlefront Bastion as a breakpoint, amazing popper, Brother in Arms, specifically in blue, as a fatigue tool, another great popper. We have CNC's a staple, of course. Count Your Blessings, right? I have E-Strike in both categories because it's found in aggro decks and mid-range control decks. Erase Phase, Fate Foreseen, Fighting Spirit, right? These are kind of sus, not really found. Warhorn had its moment. Looking for scrap. You're like, wait a second, Nathan, that's an aggro deck, or that's an aggro card. And you're actually wrong. It is an aggressive card that can only be played in mid-range and control decks. So therefore, this is not a card for aggro decks, right? It is an aggro card, and then the same thing can be said for Outmuscle and Rouse the Ancients, right? They are aggressive tools that only mid-range / controlling decks can play because of the way that they're designed, right? Aggro decks cannot afford to run one cost or one attack blues, right? Assassin can, that's about it. All the ninja cards are even like 2 attack, probably for this reason. This would be hella good in ninja. Oasis. Peace of mind, a little bit. Obviously, Sigil Sync, Test of Strength, Standing Order. Oh, what about That's All You Got? Hold the Line, Ripple Away, Snag, This Round's on Me, Truce for the Turn Zero High Roll, and then just a $70 card, Warmonger's Diplomacy. So, what we've been able to draw to a conclusion so far, we're not finished yet. Please do not take this as me saying because there are more control mid-range generics, therefore it's better. Because we have to go deeper. The aggro cards are built into the class and talent mechanics for a reason. Because they didn't want to create another Briar situation that just was generic good card deck, right? Do not draw that conclusion. I'm painting a picture and we're just in the corner. Okay. So we have 2 pieces of info here. We have ban and suspended announcements that are only targeting aggro decks. I mean, just look at all of this, right? Awakening. Oh, it's a Guardian card. It must be mid-range and in control. No. Awakening is the best aggro card that control and mid-range has ever had. Because you actively want to be dipping down in life to then leverage it. So, bunch of bans targeting aggro cards. We also have, looking at the recent support from the latter half of the Flesh and Blood sets, a strong, and when I say strong, I mean astronomically strong bias in the generic slot toward mid-range and controlled decks. Once again, I need to clarify here. I'm not saying that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying that LSS is wrong for doing it this way. It's actually very intelligent to do it this way. But there could be a side effect, and that's what I'm trying to bring light to. Okay? So, we have overwhelming support for mid-range and controlled tools in the generic slot. Okay? So then my next thought process was kind of like Briar, right? Like, are they trying to prevent the Briar situation where it's just like a couple cards that support a strategy and then boom, plug in all the generic tools? I was like, is it true? Is it is that the case? And so I began to dig. I looked at all the deck lists from the world's top 8. And the interesting aspect that I found was, maybe I could just get a, where's the live blog? Keep hitting the mouse. Live blog. Okay. What I ended up finding was CYB Enigma. How many generic cards do you think is in that deck list? I'll save you the time. 32 generic cards in the world's winning deck list. 32. Okay. In Dash, that's kind of like an afterthought, right? Like we know the answer to that question, and I don't think it's really relevant to the point. Let's look at Viscerai. Even with all the sideboard tech, it was literally just like 8. Literally like 8 generic cards. What about regular Enigma, non CYB? Or actually, yeah, this one did not have CYB. I think it had 30 generic cards in it. Hamilton's list, I counted it, and I think it was 27 or 28 generic cards because it was a mid-range to control deck. Same thing for the Enigmas. So, in the Aurora deck, it had like 18, if I'm not mistaken. All these numbers are off the top of my head, so if you want to verify them, please do. But I promise you, they're like ballpark right. So we're seeing like almost a double in the number of generic cards when you go from the aggro deck in the current meta to a mid-range or control style deck. Okay. So that left me with the question that I was asking myself. Do we have the same Briar problem, but in reverse? Have the generic mid-range and control tools gotten to the point to where when a new hero comes out, you have a support package and in goes 30 cards that are all generic? Fates, your sinks, your sigils, your and I know some of you are going to come to the point of, oh, well, this is bad sampling because of CYB, right? Because CYB and whatever. Let's use the Enigma as an example. Let me ask you this question. If CYB was not in his list, what would be? Weakest link? Oh, another generic. Oh, what's would there maybe be 3 copies of Phantasmaclasm? Probably. But it wouldn't it would veer off by like 3. There'd be 3 less generics if CYB was not in the deck. It's not a CYB problem. CYB amplifies the shit out of it, but it's not just a CYB problem. Yeah, A strike, weakest link. Exactly. Exactly. So now we have. So once again, we're trying to place all of these data points together to prove or disprove what we have proposed. And we have overwhelming support for mid-range to control in the generic slot. And we have an overwhelmingly bias in the ban announcements towards aggro. So we have 2 things literally going in opposite directions in that manner. And then all of the mid-range and control decks are literally starting with the same 26 cards. Literally. Your utility blues, your D reacts, your life gain. Next is and my question that I would ultimately beg to LSS. And this is that feedback that I was talking about earlier. If you have 30 generic cards in your deck, do you actually have a hero identity? Do you? I know I know you have the card that sits there in front of the player that has a hero name and some beautiful hero art most of the time. And a cool little weapon that usually identifies with that hero. Nowadays, they're usually one. Do you really have any hero identity? And I think that one of the strongest driving points of the game of Flesh and Blood is the aspect of hero identity. And I think that's a very big concern that we need to be careful with. And I know it's one that LSS has learned from before with the hero that's sitting right behind me. That you don't want a hero just packed full of generics doing its thing. It's not why we're playing this game. Let me get caught up in chat real quick. Maybe a few copies of blue auras, which are too slow for this meta. What I'm hearing is they should buff class cards and talent defensive cards. I mean, that is a good point. But so if you the problem is you have you have to buff the defensive cards, but if you just buff the defensive talented cards, then you just amplify the problem, right? Because now they have like a really good unravel aggression plus sinks fates and whatever, right? So if you do that, you have to kind of like take those out, right? Or you just magnify the problem. But I this is going to be a hot take. I know a lot of people are seriously considering if Sync or Fate should be banned on Twitter. And in my opinion, I don't think they need to be banned. I don't think that that's the problem. I think that aggro decks as a whole are taking a lot of risk. And with the data presented, once again, we're going to bring up this data real quick. With the data presented, I simply do not think that the aggro synergy requirement and risk associated with executing it, I don't think the juice is worth the squeeze. And that is the circling of my point to where I think in the current state of Flesh and Blood, and huge shout out to Shamir of Team Sigil. He is the one that I talked with him and he helped me come up with a lot of these points and observations, right? And this specifically is Shamir's idea slash thought process was he kind of said we saw an evolution in design within the game of Flesh and Blood where out the gate there was a lot of issues with the aggro version of the format. Obviously, chain was way too good. Even like action point economy, the whole declaring war on start and play, stay and play, that whole thing. Or not declaring war on it, but being very, very careful with it, right? And so there's been a lot of learning on that aspect of the game, right? And typically, when somebody puts their hand in the fire, they get burned and they reach back and they're they're very hesitant to reach back in, right? Or even get close or however you want to put it. So I think for a while, to be honest, for years, I don't know if they were scared. I don't know if they were purposefully cautious. I'm not entirely sure. But it seems like they, you know, they're learning a lot on that end of the game, right? Whereas there really has, other than Winter's Well, a couple Icelander tools, like there hasn't been like any like egregious control issues in the game. I would maybe say, other than like maybe Crown of Seeds, depending on who you ask. Crown of Seeds is probably like the first, but maybe like CYB is the first like big one. Crown of Seeds was kind of busted though, if we're being honest. So Shamir made the point that maybe they're just heading in that direction to learn that lesson. And I was like, damn, that's a good fucking point. That's really good. Um, and it kind of makes sense. But once again, the point of these streams is I always want to present players with information, data, ideas to help them become a better player or win more games. And currently, my end point that I want to make before I really start digging in with chat and really discussing these things, I think that I've come to the conclusion that currently, since the ban of Belittle, aggro is at a disadvantage due to when the game is balanced. And balance is obviously a relative term, but when there's not something actively like kind of breaking the game, aka Voltaire or Zen on release, right? When things are calm, aggro is at a disadvantage. And I think it revolves around the small sample sizing of the hand and drawing up every turn and the requirement to lean on synergies. And it doesn't help that control decks have the opportunity to rip those synergies apart, aka new, or even Enigma with Phantasmaclasm, CNC, and things like that. So I think aggro is just at a disadvantage. Am I saying that you're throwing if you bring an aggro deck to a tournament? Absolutely not. What I am saying is that maybe there's a 5 or 10% edge toward any deck that likes to block a little bit. And the data seems to be showing that. The data seems to be supporting that. The the cards that are coming out seems to be supporting that. But it seems like LSS kept putting their hands in the fire. I mean, you know, that's all of this. I mean, you gotta give them a break. COVID, like all of it, like that's and it was a brand new game. Come on. I the way that I look at it is ever since the start and play, stay and play, whenever that became a part of the philosophy and in a very important aspect of the game, whatever sets were designed after that statement, that's where I'm like, all right, come on, let's let's do better, right? Um, in regards to the aggro being a little bit coming on a little thick, right? So I would never present an idea or data like this if I could not produce any type of idea or solution to maybe help fix it if it needs fixing. I'm not trying to say that something's broken. I'm just saying that there is data that points to something from multiple angles, both top 8 placement numbers, which is not the best sample size. Guys, we're looking at 124, well, technically 144 because I changed this number to make a point. 144 placements, like that's not a large sample size. Just isn't, right? And but it's the best that I could do. I just cannot do any better than that. And maybe this is not even an issue because maybe the two new heroes, Dash IO and Aurora, kind of like maybe that's the solution, and maybe it's fine, and we haven't had enough tournaments to prove that that's it, right? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. All I know is that something has been in the back of my mind, constantly asking myself, why the hell would I draw a deck that can brick when I can play a deck that doesn't fucking matter what I draw? Or it does, but to a much lesser extent. Top 8 of Worlds was 5 aggro decks. Let's talk about it. This is exactly what I want from chat. I want you to fight back on me. I want you to make me prove my points. Okay? Let's talk about it. I think I have the thing here. Let me pull it back up. Fabre Heroes. Nope, wrong one. Sorry, chat. I'm fixing it right now. We got there. Not as fast as Ethan, but we got there. Okay. So you're making the claim that 5 were aggro decks in the top 8. Okay, let's talk about it. Aurora, undisputedly an aggro deck. All right, first of all, let's peel it back. This was a split format tournament. Okay, split format. So this could be draft. We don't know why these people landed where they did. But the part that I really want to emphasize is let's look at the Noah Viserai data point. A lot of people would come to the conclusion that Viserai is an aggro hero. And before the world championship, I would agree with you. However, I think that Noah's or the Runaways list is probably the best way to play Viserai. And I'm telling you right now, it's not. it is the best version, but it is not aggro. That is a mid-range deck. That is a deck that actively is wanting to block, execute when it can play a big turn, and then go right back to just doing a little bit of stuff. That is not an aggro deck. So in this context, the correct statement would be 4 of the top 8 decks are aggro decks. But once again, that's a mixed format. Let's go to the calling. Maybe the calling would be a better indication, if you will, right? This is the calling, yeah, because Zen won, right? So this is the calling. Well, how many aggro decks do we have here? We have one Aurora. That's definitely an aggro deck. I do not know if I don't know anything about that IRA list, so let's go investigate if it's up. I am looking for calling IRA. Congratulations to the first person to top 8 on IRA. So we have Sink Belows, we got Oasis, we got Flick Flax, Fate Foreseen. This ain't an aggro deck. Hate to break it to you, it ain't it. Okay, so not an aggro deck. Once again, I already know the answer to this question. I'm not going to waste the time to go to the deck list. That Zen deck is not an aggro deck. It's just like the IRA deck. It's got Flick Flax, it's got Wax Ons, it's got Wax Offs. I mean, it is a very, very mid-range deck. Okay. So we have aggro, mid-range, obviously aggro, either mid-range control, aggro, mid-range control. Okay. So we have 3 aggro decks in the top 8 of a format that was all CC, which is a much better data point than the World Championship. Okay. So once again, this is one tournament. It doesn't mean anything, but if we are looking at the top 8s, this would support my conclusion. Also, 75% of the semis were mid-range decks. Okay. Also, humble brag. I said that Zen was the best deck in the format in Classic Constructed on my last tier list, and it won the all CC event. Just throwing that out there. If you want the best tier list in the business, you know where to go. You know where to go. All right, let me get caught up in chat. Let me get caught up in chat. Yeah, top 8 of Worlds was 5 aggro decks. Technically 4. Mid-range control decks need those disruptive generic tools to not get completely blown out by aggro decks 5-card hands. I agree. I agree with that statement. But is the combination of both a shitload of good generic defense reactions and that disruption, is that too good? Is the ability to bank, block, and disrupt too good? That's a valid question. But you're 100% correct. If they did not have those tools, they get ran over. Unless, right? Because like, but the problem is, what is the point in even saying that when everybody has those tools, right? It's like saying if we had air, we could breathe. Like no shit, you know? Can we look at RTN and PTI? So I want to be careful with this one. Aggro will always overperform at the RTN and ProQuest level. Period. I don't care what game you are playing. That is just a fact. Higher representation. I mean, it's literally why Aurora was like top dog for the longest and then the conversion was okay. It was mid when we actually got to a tournament with all the best players in the world. She didn't do bad, don't get me wrong, but she wasn't the best deck in the room. Your opponent playing Sync Fate from Arsenal is always the worst feeling as an aggro deck. You get super punished by bricks. Yeah, yeah. But once again, let's have that discussion real quick for 2 seconds. If you took Sync and Fate out, what about Azalea? Is that not the most toxic shit on the planet? But hear me out. Let's do a little bit of reverse engineering. What if part of the little tinfoil hat theory? What if LSS is waiting to ban some, I'm not going to use the word all, but some generic defense reactions when Azalea LLs? And the inclusion of the overpower keyword is the proof behind that statement. Because why would you make overpower, which is literally dominate at home? It is strictly worse in every imaginable way, right? Why would you make that keyword? I think it is my opinion, and it's also a very genius play because you get to elevate Bravo, but also you have the design safety net of the fact that there's a lot of fridges in the game now. So like you increase the value of Bravo's dominate, but he's not like oppressive. So you actually like by getting rid of the D react, you make Bravo relevant, not too good, but like good. And you kind of solve a bunch of problems at once. So my theory is if they do ban Sync or Fate, they're gonna wait till Azalea LLs. That's what I would do. Aurora's a bit of a face roll hero anyway. We saw in the finals, threw everything in Enigma with no real strategy and clearly didn't work. Cool talk, a lot to think about, but I gotta go. Thanks. I appreciate you being here. Aggro is rough when your opponents can just oops, I win. Well, I think the problem is like your deck can say oops, they win, right? I think that's more of the problem than your opponent just saying oops, I win. Um Calling is bad because more aggro decks made day 2 of Worlds? What? Aggro is bad because more aggro decks made. Okay, let's talk about that. Okay. We had 650 people in the call. Obviously, everybody's not going to have time to convert their decks to the Noah strategy, so we're going to say the overwhelming majority of these Viscerai lists are like traditional aggro Viscerai lists. So we have 167 just between these two heroes. Then you add the 45, that's 205 plus, wait, 167 plus 5 is 172 plus 40 is 212 plus 45 is going to be 257. So just on those four heroes, you have 257 aggro decks. That's almost half the field, but 42% of the field is aggro decks. So I don't understand your point of aggro decks made day 2 of Worlds. It's completely invalid. Because as we can see from the Excel sheet, there should be a third. It should be like a third mid range, a third. So aggro had an overwhelming representation in the calling, not an underwhelming. And it still came up short at the end. Thanks for helping me prove my point, though. I actually didn't know that. Zen into newer Victor. It's not even a game. Then before the ban, control is crazy powerful at the moment. I mid range she was. Aggro decks have been sorry, I'm a little bit behind in chat. Give me a second if you have anything in there. Aggro decks have been the best position since Ice left the format. I'm glad you mentioned Ice because the numbers are underperforming while they should be at their best. So I'm glad you mentioned that. All the data that we looked at post Belittle ban, 90% of that, there was no Ice, right? So theoretically, aggro should like literally be at its best, and it's coming up short. So that's one. In statistics, when you see something that's so far, you kind of it's obviously always better to get a sample size, but you know, it's you don't need an astronomical sample size if two data points are screaming in the other directions, right, of each other. And that's kind of what's happening here in multiple different scenarios, if we're being honest. Where do aggro decks like Kano fit into the aggro conversation? Kano is a combo deck, not an aggro deck. That's my opinion. Uh maybe he's an aggro deck now because he lost the tomes. I'll concede that point. Maybe I don't know, but he's such a low representation that, if we're being honest, I don't think it really matters. Sorry to any Kano players. Uh, and I think that tends to happen more often because your arsenal can just be the missing pop off piece. Yeah, and then you just get disrupted, right? So high octane and CYB are out of here next week. I think high octane goes. I do agree with that, and I think CYB should go, not because it's unbalanced, but it is not a net positive on the game. That is my basis. It is balanced. It can be beat. I hate this Yu-Gi-Oh ass dynamic where you're playing this guessing game. You know what, chat? Fuck CYB, if I'm being honest, because it is not good. It is not a good game practice to have a tool that completely warps. You could turn any deck in the game into a CYB deck as long as it had a half of a fridge and some 3 blocks, right? Any warrior, any guardian, any brute, any hell, half the rune blades can do it. Fuck, ninja could do it even. Jesus Christ. Like News doing it. You could turn probably 70% of the decks into a CYB deck and try to fatigue people. Why in God's name should I, as a player, sit down in front of somebody and have to guess in sideboarding what the fuck they're trying to do? Now, are there unique game strategies that people can develop? But this shit is shallow. CYB, like Hamilton innovating and having Bullander and forcing people to bring in AB when armor 90% of the time might be the better option. That is flesh and blood. Not, oops, you only brought 60 cards. That shit is trash. Like, so it's literally like the most Yu-Gi-Oh and I do not mean that in a nice way either. It is literally like, oh, you have this sideboard card and you decide to put it in. Congratulations. You know, I don't want the game's already polarizing. I don't need another fucking layer of it. We're still trying to peel off the band-aids from Illusionist and a bunch of other shit. So like yeah. I changed my mind. Fuck CYB. Okay, let me get caught back up. Went on a little tangent there. Sorry about that, chat. D-Racks are also needed for real game versus assassin. I agree. They have their purpose. They're very important. But also, Downblade Dory kind of needs a little help too. Like you see what I'm saying? Like taking out the D-Racks, kind of like other than assassin, look kind of good. I'm just saying. Um, I would almost argue that there were only 3 aggro decks. Sam's Dash IO is more combo. That's a great point. Thank you. Every minute we're becoming more accurate. Um, you could see he wasn't running combo into Aurora. He did run system reset. Yep. I thought it was more of a if it lines up, I win specific combo. Would Dawnblade Dory be aggro? No. Dawnblade Dory historically, from Josh's perspective, is a mid-range deck. You can build it very aggro leaning, but fundamentally the way Dory plays it is mid-range. Isn't aggro being good in a ProQuest RTN and still even decent in the Worlds level event while longer decks doing well because of consistency good? Buff aggro more in smaller events. Always roll aggro. Well, that's a fantastic question. A great point. So theoretically, if we could build if we could build a a gaming environment, that's probably the way you would do it, right? The problem is Flesh and Blood is a competitive card game. It is. They're making strides in the casual play, but so much of this game thrives on how competitive it is, both in the fairness to acquire prize support, uh, all of these things. And let me add a little bit of context to what I'm about to say. For any player that wasn't around when Michael Hamilton brought Bullander to US Nats, that deck actually revolutionized the game. And I'll explain how. It redefined the idea of what value truly is. And it changed. I just noticed it in players in the conversations they were having. Everybody's deck building just shifted from a competitive meta game perspective. I can with 100% confidence say that it was the single most impactful moment in Flesh and Blood history. That one deck. And it just revolutionized how people thought about the game, the angles you could take to win games, what you should prioritize, what you shouldn't. It truly changed the competitive landscape of Flesh and Blood. What I worry is that the same thing happens, to answer your question, to increase the divide at the upper tier events. Like, let's say I'm not even going to begin to say that I have any type of influence like that. I'm just saying, what if players start asking the same questions I'm asking? Why am I risking bricks? Why am I doing all this? And then what if the slower decks have a 60% advantage at the highest level and a 65% advantage? When players are going to continue to consolidate at the highest level when they find the path of least resistance and ways to make it more optimal. So maybe in a current situation, we don't know how much better it is. We technically don't know if it is better. But I worry that if you have that design, that like you might have a sweet spot for a while where Aggro deck does really good down here, and then it slims up here, but then it could just keep moving, and we might not want that, right? It could it could very quickly kind of like just become this really degenerate aspect of the game. But I agree with what you're saying, 100%. I just think we have to be careful. Thoughts on Riptide and Bolton at Worlds? I don't know about that, Chief. Leaving up Aggro Ira listening to this and almost stopped to just put poison in the well and make Flick Flack combo block 3 deck. That's actually hilarious. I played in the CYB Ira the other day. It's a plague. Meanwhile, Aurora slaving up 0 for 4 the hero. Fab isn't designed in a way where big life gain can work. At least not yet. Oh yeah, I never gave my possible solutions, right? So first thing we need, I think, is we need a couple good generic. We need something since fucking Ravenous Rabble, okay? I'm not saying unban Belittle. That's a very scary thing to do. I would not do that. I would not. Although Belittle wouldn't fit in Aurora because of like the way it works, right? Like it's just not. You have to run your 0 for 4s. Like that's the whole point of the deck, and you can't run that with Belittle. So I don't think she would actually run Belittle. Dash IO literally can't. Zen would run it maybe. Oh, Assassin would run it. Ugh. Nope, can't unban Belittle. God no. Jesus Christ. Yeah, so that's not an option. And then from that point on, you basically you would I think we need a replacement that's not as good. We need one or two, not a lot. You don't want to overdo it because then we go right back into that Briar slot, right? We just need some aggro tools. Maybe a better Razor Reflex, maybe something like reaction based. Maybe like a generic Lightning Press or something like that. I don't know. And a second idea, shout out to Damien. This was going to sound a little crazy. Chat, what if we limited the number of generic cards you can register to in a classic constructed deck? What if there was a limit? My favorite thing about that idea is my biggest complaint about cards like Warmonger's Diplomacy, all those utility 3 blue blocks. They have absolutely no opportunity cost. Period. Right? There's like no opportunity cost. It's a blue, it blocks 3, and it can like single-handedly win you a game. What more could you ask from a card? If you put players in a situation where they have to choose between their Warmonger's Diplomacy and their Sink Blow, you correct that. You fix that. You solidify hero identity. You incorporate precision sideboarding that's not a fucking guessing game. Right? If you want a defensive package, you can have it. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat this. This would be an astronomical change, right? Like it would change the meta overnight, completely flip it on its head. But and that's why with the limit you would have to be generous. Somebody in chat asked, "What would the limit be?" I'm thinking 20 cards, right? That means you gotta find 40 cards in your class or talent. I don't think that's crazy. If you look at a standard Aurora deck has like 18 to 20 generic cards. Like that's fine. You got snatches in there. You got, you know, a couple Warmonger diplomacies, maybe some poison the wells, a couple pieces of equipment. Equipment would count. And maybe a couple D reacts, right? Like there's nothing wrong with that. But when you start getting to 30, 35 generics, you have to start entertaining the idea that something is not right. Right? Even Briar at her heyday, did she even run 30? Probably, to be honest. That's what I'm saying. Like 20 is a lot. Like I but just think about like it's no longer a guessing game. It's not it solves is it going to be a lot of hard work to figure out what the right number is? 100 fucking percent. I'm just pulling 20 out of my ass. I don't know if that's right. I know it needs to be slightly on the generous side because you do not want to, like people in chat mentioned, you don't want to let decks like assassins that are very flexible in their game plan to gain too much of an advantage. But there has, if you have a silver bullet card that is blue and blocks 3, I need there to be an opportunity cost to that card. I need there to be. And currently it does not exist. And mid-range and control decks are gaining too much. No blue block 3 card should win a game on the spot, like Warmonger's Diplomacy. Does it serve a purpose? Yes. Yes, it does. It stops people. They've said it before. It stops people from doing degenerate shit. Was I think James's exact words. And I agree with that. But you can't have a card that just auto wins some match. Maybe that's a little rough, but like swings the matchup 10, 20, 25%, and it be a fucking blue block 3. It's it's like, when are we going to get to that Yu-Gi-Oh situation where everybody's just playing fucking floodgate cards, right? And it's like, oh, you found your card that doesn't let me do X. So on to game 2. Oh wait, there's not one. There isn't a game 2. But my poor Cavdane adult CC deck. Like I said, this would be, if they made a change like that, it would be the single biggest change in Flesh and Blood history of the game, probably. Like the only thing that comes close is like changing the sideboarding rules for Blitz, but like let's slow down on that. I guess it just ultimately comes down to the way that I ultimately look at it. Do you have a working system, a hero comes out. Let's use Florian as an example. And you say, okay, Florian, let me add my fucking 30 generic cards that are defensive in nature, a couple class cards, and let me get some Earth. Is that the deck building problem you want us to solve? Like, it, new being the same way? Like, let me throw in my 26 generics. Enigma, let me throw in my 32 generic cards because I know I want to play defensive. So let me just sweep that in there. And then I'll play some more blue cards that instantly win the game. Mirror guy. I feel like we're reaching a point in one direction only. This is not the case in the other direction. Aggro decks currently in the game are extremely identified by their class and talent. But the second you start heading the other direction, there's an astronomical shift away from that. And I mean astronomical. Like a complete 180. It literally goes, oh, aggro, less than 10 generics. Mid range, probably 15 to 20. Control deck, 30 plus. Like it's almost linear, literally. I know it sounds crazy. And it's ambitious, but hero identity in Flesh and Blood is like it's very important to me. I think it is a lot of other players. And it seems to be for them because they have the whole LL system that kind of like, you know, really amplifies that importance of it. Now, so I think it's fair to say that it's very important for them too. And I don't want to see that go away with, oh, here's a new warrior coming out. Let me grab my sinks, fates, some sigils, my weapons, and some reactions. I don't want that. It's probably not going to happen, but I don't know. You can't rotate certain cards. You have to change the whole game to a rotation based to reduce confusion within the player base. So it's either you're a rotating game or you're not. But creating a simple sideboarding rule is not overly complex. It's something that every player has to learn, right? It does not hurt. It does not crush the investors, the collectors, whatever you want to call them, because Warmonger's diplomacy is not going to go to $10 overnight. Nobody's going to be pissed off, right? It's going to go down because some people will play it because it will finally have an opportunity cost, which is, I think, what we want to accomplish. Ellis says, hire this man. 20 is a lot. But I'm going on the side of caution. I don't want to make Assassin too good because they can, like, you know, neat idea. It definitely caused ripples. Oh, 100%. It would flip the game over, everything that we know about it overnight. It would change everything. Neat idea. There's a reason we got so many generics. If you pick a number, you have to make it divisible by 3. Oh yeah, that's actually a really good. It's a really good point. You do. I mean, I guess you don't have to, but yes, I think you're right. It would need to be divisible by 3 to keep it clean. Which means the most roundest appropriate number would be 15. That'd be that. 15, not including equipment. Are we on to something, chat? Is that our number? Is that our number? Just think about the dynamic. Just look at the CYB situation. How good is a CYB deck when they can't run Oasis, they can't run Sigil, Sync, and Fate? They have to pick between. Oh, you want your 2D reacts? You give up Warmonger's Diplomacy. Dash IO literally blows your shit out. That one dynamic solves what I consider to be kind of an egregious design of CYB just by limiting the number of generics in your deck. So LSS, my solution to the problem, because I don't like to just present issues or problems or whatever. I like to try and help solve them as well. Let's entertain the idea of putting a cap on generics into your deck. This would make deck building more interesting, more difficult, less options, but options at a cost. Your utility blue block threes that win the game sometimes, like Warmonger's Diplomacy, they have a cost. Not just that action point, but a real cost to adding that to your deck. Instead of this autopilot feeling because you don't really have to think about it because you know it hits all the wickets without thinking about it and you just throw it in there. And then if you have this degenerate generic based life gain deck, well, if you want 9 CYBs, you can get Sync's Fate, boom, you're at 15. No sigils, no Oasis. No, that's all you got. Makes it more manageable. Is it perfect? Probably not. Are there going to have to be some balancing tunings to adjust to make classes like Assassin a little less powerful? Because you're effectively reducing your access to D-Reacts or increasing the opportunity cost of D-Reacts, which therefore would naturally reduce the amount of D-Reacts in the format. Something to think about. We have to get this idea up to LSS. I don't know how though. Clip it and tag them on Twitter. I don't know. I don't know how to do it. Just join. What would be the big change? Can someone catch me up? I hope that explained it. Generics in every set, I think, is more for creating a balanced, limited experience. I mean, it probably is, right? That's a huge part of it. And that's the thing. If you incorporate the generic limit in Classic Constructed, you don't have to change anything for Lit. Keep printing those generics. Giving people more choices is never wrong. But when you don't limit it and the choices become infinite, how many generics did Bullander have? Well, you had like 9 two-frates. You had like Fighting Spirit, Wounded Bull, and like even Yellow Fighting Spirit. You had a lot of ice. Usually like Sigil, maybe. Sync, Fate, Heart of Findale. I mean, that's 16 right there. You probably have Oasis, 20. If I had to guess off, this is just off the top of my head, it's been a while, but probably anywhere between 20 and 25 in Bullander. Because they ran the red and yellow Fighting Spirits a lot of time. But majestic generics from old sets and Sync Below and stuff are just too strong. Right. And we are actively increasing the opportunity cost of adding those to your deck. So sure, you can pick your powerful card, but you're gonna have to pay for it. Yeah, it ran Warmongers as well. So yeah, I mean, probably around the ballpark of 25 generic cards. How much do good generics play into LSS set financials? Given sets are designed around classes, generics are something everyone buys. Well, to answer that question, I don't have LSS's financial statements. They're not a publicly traded company, so there's no way to obtain them. But I am a very involved player and have been for a very, very long time. 4 years now, maybe even five. And I can without a doubt say that Bright Lights was probably the least sold set ever in the entire history of the game. I don't know if that's true. Just from all the knowledge I've accumulated and the pieces I can put together, I think that that's a very educated guess. Put it that way. And that didn't have a lot of generics. So I'm not saying that there is causation, but there is at least correlation. Deck building now seems like create a list, put in CNCs, E Strike, Sync, Fate, Warmongers. You have a third deck completed. Yeah, I mean, like, we're getting to that point. We are getting to that point. I'm sorry, not a big fan. Keep the game the way it is. Build for the meta. Okay, I mean, I'm not saying. Okay, so I don't know. Let's assume that they keep the trajectory that they have, right? And I went over this in this card example. This is every aggro card that they've printed in the generic slot ever that is remotely even entertainable to play. Okay? And in recent sets, there hasn't been shit. Okay? We got these. Let's be honest. This is a limited ass card. This has had its place. These are memes. Had its place. It's a good card, but only certain decks can run it. This is a meme. At least at one point it was good, but then the game evolved. Uh, Solid staple, and then meme, solid staple. So you have three what I would consider staples in E Strike. E Strike is like a everything card. So we have four aggro staples that we have to choose from. Have fun. And then we have a couple pieces of equipment. Snaps are only ran in one deck now. So like even that is it's sad when that card is becoming like invalidated um, from an ag. Now let's flip the script, right? Like you say, okay, don't limit, let's keep it how it is, right? Well, what happens when we get another Stonewall Gauntlet in a different slot or another Diplomacy? This round's on me. Truce, snag, ripple away, hold the line. That's all you got. Hard to find it. You know, that right there is just the blues. And we've already encompassed twice as many cards as the aggro deck or the aggro options. And we're only in the blues. Look, I have it count 54 cards, 27, literally half. Literally half. And bro, I'm reaching. Seek Horizon? Are you kidding me? Emissary of the Moon, Tide, and Wind. Are you kidding me? Like, I was reaching. Bro. I put Talishar in there for fucking Christ's sake. Like, I was reaching. To be honest, this number should be 20. If we're being 100% on, and this number should probably be 50. Because there's some duds here, like maybe Polarity. It'll see its day. It'll see its day in court one day. But like, I mean, so Remembrance, Wounded Bull, Zealous, Unmovable, Weakest Link, Test of Strength, Standing Order, Saint Blow, Sigil. This row is better than all the aggro staples. This row, is there a row that's not? Looking for Scrap, Oasis, Outmuscle, Warhorn, Humble. That row's better. Count Your Blessing, Down and Dirty, Erase Face, Favor Sit. That row's better. CNC, Censor, Blue Brothers in Arms, Battlefront, Bastion. There's not a row in the control section that isn't better than all of the aggro cards. Like, it's literally a meme. So, like, at the current point in time, what you're saying, I don't disagree. Like, just leaving it alone, build to the meta. But you can't, we've noticed a trend in the direction in which it's going. And I think that it would be very bad to draw a conclusion that, oh, you know what, chat? We're drawing the line at 32 generics. We would never go up to 35 and add another playset. Like, there's no way, right? Like, that would be silly, right? No, they're gonna fucking print the next CYB or whatever fills that spot, and they'll slap that shit in there, right? And then, okay, now to build a mid-range or control deck, you only got to 25 cards. Congratulations. So I agree. It's not a problem right now. I have identified a trajectory that I think needs correcting. That is the premise. I also ran energy pots. Yeah, those are generic, sure. Problem with 15 generics, some decks would be bad. Enigma. There are not enough good illusionist cards for her. Fix that. Like, I don't know. Let's fix that. Like, I'm not trying to say, oh yeah, like, can we do this tomorrow? Because obviously, like, there's moving pieces, right? But okay, so maybe they make this change tomorrow and Enigma is bad for 6 months until they can fix it. Cry me a fucking river. I don't care. Go tell a Guardian player about your feelings on that subject. And, like, I mean, they've been in the fucking dirt for over a year now. There doesn't need to be an extra cost because LSS has already did that by making our class cards worse defensively or limiting the amount we have. I'm not sure I understand that point. I mean, Bright Lights had 0 to 50. Did LSS catch lightning in a bottle with Bolton design? Actively make the deck worse the more generic cards you put in. So, Bolton is a great example of going too far in that direction. You want to give people a deck where they can add tools. I think Bolton would be in a lot better place if they did not print Lumina. I think Lumina got that hero in a lot of trouble, and they're making a lot of safe decisions because of that card. Meeps mentioned. Sorry, it wasn't an extremely positive way. That's just usually the case with talented heroes. There are a lot of decks that get worse by adding generics. They're just mostly aggro. That's the point. Aggros require synergies. Drawing synergies is difficult, way more difficult than blocking 4. Therefore, aggro decks not as good when you average out the value over time, over a long period of time. Defensive decks run more generics. Yes, that is correct. Imagine Guardian without generics. What would they do? Or maybe LSS Guardian Mastery Pack. Bunch of Guardian. Replace generic. They would lose more. That is correct. Which is a difficult feat at this point. You have to then just have a hard cap ceiling on anything doing more than 18 to 20 damage. So why do we have to cap it at 18 to 20 damage? Trying to think of your point. If okay, so you're basically trying to say that if you get rid of D reacts, then people can't block any more than 12 to 13 a turn, so therefore you need to limit the damage ceiling. I mean, my solution allows them to run the D reacts if they so choose. They just can't run it all. They can't do all of it. And like I said, maybe we need to be extremely generous with the generics. But sorry, a deck running 32 generics feels off. Like I said, LSS already did the work for you. They made our class cards worse. I mean, isn't that part of the problem? Shouldn't the class cards be way better? I actually joked about generics a year ago when the generic staple is going to be so prevalent. You'll be able to play a full generic merchant. I mean, we're getting close. Once again, we're not saying get rid of all the generics. I'm just saying put a limit to it. 15. So Guardian, you could run Rouse, Zealous, Pummel, Sync, Fate. Anything more than that, you got to give and take, right? Like if you want your I don't know Prism Tech or whatever you're doing, you got to give up a I don't know one of your fates, or you have to start making those decisions instead of throw it in there. Save high octane. Good luck. I think it's gone. Over half of your control cards don't get played. Almost all the aggro cards don't get played. Only 3 of these get played. Okay. If you want to go with that point, okay. Cards that actively see play in the game of Flesh and Blood in the past year. Okay. Here we have E Strike. We're going to cross that one out though because it's also in the above list, so it doesn't really matter. I would just because one deck has Exude, I'm not including that. I'll give it to Premeditate, Premed, Rabble, Scar, Snatch, and then Poison. We have 5 cards, not including equipment. Let's go to the control. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. Okay. So 16 versus 5. If we count the good stuff. Does that not? I'm really trying to not be biased here. Like in a perfect world, I would like to be wrong. If we're being 100% honest. But the fact of the matter is that when you compare the two, it's not even close. I mean, Razor's a meme. I put in serious work yesterday. Yeah, I mean, it's an okay card. It's okay. I'll put use below rate class cards. What? God forbid Enigma has to build a normal balanced deck for the rest of us. Get them out. I mean, Guardians are now getting 0 for 4 block draw card. I mean, exactly. Like they're gonna have to start picking, right? Like maybe you can only do sinks and test of strength instead of like test of strength, sink, fate, unmovable. You know, you gotta start picking, choosing. Give and take is a generic. Weakest link is a generic, but it ain't an aggro card. I'll tell you that much. But I got give and take in there. But it's like it was a role player in Briar. That is it. You can't just look at generics, dude. This is the super weird way of looking at it. Aggro decks are printed with specific sets, synergies that are frequently pushed limited game. Yes, Thomas, I 100% agree with you. 90% of an aggro deck's toolkit is found in the class or talent section. 110% agree with you. However, I don't know if you missed the part where I explained the idea and logic to kind of counter that is when you dig into the aggro tools, right? Let's use Runeblade as an example. When you start to incorporate class cards, using the class cards to create conditional. Sorry about that. Using the class cards for aggro purposes, which is where most of the aggro tools are found. As a game designer, you have to link a form of synergy to give the class a feel, right? Or else we're all playing generics, right? If you make everything a head jab, we're not playing flesh and blood, right? So you have to require synergies to extrapolate the value in an aggressive fashion. Okay? Now, what I mentioned earlier was the fact that in the game of Flesh and Blood, you draw a small sample size of 4 cards every single turn. It's very hard to consistently draw into synergies, therefore putting you at a disadvantage when you can just block. That is now obviously you have the arsenal to smooth things over, but then I also made the counterpoint of every single day arsenal hate is being created, which is a good thing. It creates interaction in the game. It's a net positive on the game. But we have Dissolve Reality, Plow Under, CNC, 3 cards just printed in the last set that say flip over the card. If it's X, blow it up. Right? So we have Breaking Point. We have a new card that just got spoiled that blows up the arsenal. I mean, the arsenal is quickly becoming a liability in some situations in regards to aggro. Anybody can place a D-React down there at no cost unless you get hit with a CNC. Everything else is fine, though. So the thing is that, yes, the aggro tools are baked into the class. I agree. And I'm not saying they're even bad. But Belittle was that card that injected consistency into the aggro deck. Was it too much? 100%. Of course it was. It was way too much. But it was a tool that injected some consistency into aggro decks. And I'm saying we need that. I'm saying we need something like that to just be a generic tool to smooth out some of the inconsistencies associated with drawing synergies in an aggro fashion to extrapolate your value. Right? That's the idea. So, yes, 90% of aggro tools, they're in the class or talent spot. And that's very good design. That is the way. Plunder Run and stuff like that are great examples of why you can't bake all the aggro tools into the generic card pool. I'm not saying they need to even out the score and go card for card control and act. No, that'd be a terrible, terrible idea. I'm saying that aggro decks need a tool to smooth out some of the inconsistencies associated with having to draw synergies turn after turn after turn in a 4-card sample size. Who runs Fighting Spirit? Fighting Spirit literally revolutionized the game for, I don't know, a 2-year time period. Vendale's Fighting Spirit? Icelander. That was the card. Any control deck, Tree Frog Dash. Oldham ran this fucking card. This was the best popper for the longest time. For the longest time. Just bring Art of War back and belittle. No, that's too far. You're being maximally biased by only looking at generics. Was that statement made before me explaining everything? You made another comment. You said illusionists having access to generic defensive tools is also inherently worse for the game than it is for other. That's why I'm not saying anything needs to be banned. I'm not saying Sync Blow needs to be banned. I'm not saying that Fate needs to be banned. I'm just saying that if you incorporate an opportunity cost to adding an excess number of those cards, it could be a good thing. You get 15 or 18 generics. Pick. You want to run that Warmonger's Diplomacy? Might have to cut your Sync Blow. Oh, you want to run both of those? Might have to cut your Sigil of Solace. Can't run Oasis for Kano Hate. You got to pick and choose. And then actually play class cards that have a hero identity instead of block 3, block 4, block 3, block 4. Just saying. The point is that whenever you look at defensive decks, they share more cards between each other. I definitely agree. But I don't understand how that's like restricting generic cards further exacerbates the gap in power between talented and non-talented heroes. I agree. 100%. That is actual factual. But is that ever going to change? Was Katsu ever going to be a better option than Zen? I mean, Dory's doing fine compared to Bolton. Let's look at the heroes. Arachne just sucks, so there's no reason to compare it currently. They might fix that, clearly. But Arachne sucks compared to the other assassins. But like Azuri and Nu, it's hard to find a reason to play Azuri, if we're being honest. I know it won the Pro Tour, I get it. But it's hard to find a reason. And it comes down to talent. If we're being honest. The Mystic card pool is just nuts compared to it. Okay. Draconic Ninja versus regular Ninja, they kind of on separate axes. I don't think you really gain a lot by having the Draconic keyword. I think all the key tools are built into the Ninja class. Earth Runeblade. The other Runeblades will be just fine. He's not even the best Runeblade. Viscerai probably. Wizard. The regular Wizard's better than the talented Wizard currently. Maybe not. Actually, Acelia is probably better than Kano right now after the book burning. We already went over. I think KO is probably as good as Levia. I don't think one's particularly better. Like, I don't think generics affects this relationship at all. There is no just illusionist, so that point's mute. All the rangers are just rangers. So, yeah, I don't think that problem is as bad as you think it is. Once I go through all the heroes, it used to be a big problem. 100% agree, but now it's not that bad. Imagine a world with 15 generic limit in X years where the generic card pool is 10 times the size it is today. Launch a merchant hero that would have unlimited generics as a hero text. Holy shit. Guys, calm down. We're doing LSS's job for them. And we're off payroll. Let's pump the brakes a little bit. Keep some of the tank. That's a good ass idea though. That's good. That's good. Uh 5 years, generics will be one of in LL. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, even if I'm slightly off, right? Like maybe there's just 3 times as many good mid-range control tools than aggro. In 3 years, that number doubles. Now we have what, 6 aggro cards, and we have, I don't know, 40, 36 of the. I mean, the trajectory is what I'm worried about. I'm not worried about today. Today will be fine. I'm worried about the trajectory. Wait, on a serious note, wasn't Art of War the aggro smoother? To some extent, it was. The problem with Art of War is it only played in like Ninja, right? That was the only here. I know Levia ran it a little bit, but let's be honest. No other hero really had the design space to run it other than Ninja. So yes, Art of War was the smoother for Ninja. That would be an accurate statement. Is it really fair for aggro decks to have consistency in that way? What sort of consistency should control and mid range have access to? Do we get armor with 3 temper now? I mean, let's. I think we're exaggerated a tad, right? I when I say get like, I don't know. What if they made a card like Belittle, but instead of searching for a minnowism, you made a a Fang Strike equivalent permanent that went on the board? You just had a +1 in reaction that just sat there on the board. You could use it whenever you wanted. Just a token. So I mean, it's a 1 for 4 go again, but you get to bank the 1 on an on hit at some point in the game, or you can stack them. You know, if you did something along that line, it adds a level of consistency because you have a little bit of go again baked in, but you're not invalidating Sink Below or Fate Foreseen. Like, I don't think it creates this equation where, like, what about the other guys? What did they get? I mean, once again, I'm not asking for a belittle type solution. Belittle is way too good. I'm just asking for something that is generic, that can easily slot in, which basically means it has to have natural go again, that can easily slot in to aggro decks to give them a little boost. That's it. A Snatch 2.0. Doesn't even have to have go again, but a Snatch like card. That's it. Just a good, generic fucking aggro card that you can put 3 of, that reduces the synergy by a little bit, that mathematically reduces the chances of bricking, which is aggro's problem. That's it. That's literally all I'm asking. That's it. And maybe the limit on generics. They, aggro decks should not be these consistent machines. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not suggesting that. What I'm saying is they're a little bit short in the toolbox. It was run into Lexi so often. Yeah. I'm being curious about seeing Belittle coming back, but I do agree it'd be a bad idea. Yeah, I'm not on board for bringing back Belittle. I am in camp that would be a mistake. I think what you're asking for is a generic card that can tutor a class. I don't know. This game's got a bad history with tutor. I'm not touching that word. I am not touching. But then you get into the Katsu issue, correct? Tutors are bad for the game. I agree with that statement. Would you say the Runaways Viscerai list is a good example of how generics can give a deck a good defensive stand? It's a great example, and it also shows that traditional aggro decks are having to move in defensive directions to reach their best version of the hero, which is another argument to support the claim. Not factual. I just, as a Runeblade player myself, and looking at what the deck list is trying to accomplish, I think it is a really good deck and the best way to play Viscera. That's my opinion. It's not a fact. And if that is true, then once again, that is another aggro deck that we lost to the mid range category. I wonder why. Part of the class flavor is restricting what kinds of cards classes have access to. If you restrict generics, then you have to reduce class flavor by giving every class tool for more thing. I mean, how many D reacts you need is like, that's the ultimate question. Like, do you need Sync, Fate, Oasis? That's all you got. Unmovable. You don't need Oasis, like all that shit. You don't need all of that. Sure, you got to pick and choose a couple. I don't see where the red flag is there. I think a better version of the generic restriction would be a restriction on the number of generics in a 60 card deck, but not. I mean, sure, you could cut it up however you wanted. Yes, I like I said, this is like the genesis of the idea. It's not. It's not. It has not been refined in any way, form, or fashion. I personally wouldn't count Rouse as a defensive card. Okay, let's talk about that. It's actually a great point. So looking for scrap, outmuscle, and Rouse would be all in zealous belting would all be included in the argument that you were trying to make. And the argument that I would make to counter that is, what aggro deck can run this card? What aggro deck can run this card? What aggro deck can run this card, and what aggro deck can run this card? The answer is 0 on all of them. Okay? So, aggro deck cannot run any of them effectively. Okay? These 4 cards are aggressive tools that must be placed in a mid-range or control deck. Just a fact of the matter. Assassin is the only one that can effectively play looking for scrap. Ninja can't even play looking for scrap because most of their blue uh combo cards are 2 attack in blue. They can't even effectively use looking for scrap. So, yes, they are aggressive cards, but they cannot be put in an aggro deck. And that is why they are in the control category. I had the same thought when I first put them in the list. They actually went into the aggro category, but I was like, wait a second. That doesn't make sense. Rather than what's better, in my opinion, is having there be some sort of common next best ofs or generic that serve roles that are weak, but that weakness is part of what gives the class's flavor. Let me read that again. Is having there be some sort of next best ofs or generics that serve roles that are weak, but that weakness is part of what gives the class flavor. So you're saying like they should have you have sync, but then like a weak generic class card that's a D react? Or are you saying it the other way around? The class D react should be good and sync below should be scaled down. You have to clarify that one. Sorry, I'm getting a little tired. You also don't get to auto include CNC in every deck. See, Kevin, you're getting it. Getting it. Speaking to the limited generic army. Yep. MST was a mistake. I agree with you. Well, partially. I think the MST Mystic mechanic completely invalidates the point of cards having blue pitch. Because a blue pitch in a Mystic deck is not a blue pitch. Just from a value perspective, right? Um Levels of enlightenment being a blue, yeah, okay. Like in all of them, bond prognosis, bonds, mirror guy, like okay. I agree with the idea. I just wouldn't frame it that way. I'll put it that way, Brad, because I like to be a little bit more, you know, tactful. Uh, Art of War was dominant in Shadow Room. Like, yeah, yeah, sure. I agree. A lot of my aggro games feel like fall apart because of all red hands. Right? There's so many synergies. That's what I'm saying. You have to draw non-attacks, attacks. You have to get a blue. If you don't get a blue, you can't pay for this. And then you have to do. Oh, you still need go again, by the way. And then the other side, oh, got a direct in Arsenal. Let me just filter that card I don't want because it's sync below. Up, I'll just block. It just, man, something feels off. Uh, so what? A 0 for 4 on hit create a ponder? Maybe. Uh, maybe a maybe a. What about a 0 cost card that has 2 modes on it? Little E-strike action here. First mode is it's a 0 cost 2 block attacks for 3. In the first mode, the attack would get +1 on hit, create a ponder token. The next mode would be go again. So you either play a 3 go again, a head jab, or you create the breakpoint on hit effect. But you can't have both. Something like that. A nice little tool to just add to it. That would be that's just right off the dome. I don't know. but something along those lines. Aggro decks could totally get on block effects to play better into defense. I mean, it could be, yeah. I'm a control liking player, but if ice is ever in the meta, then Belittle should just auto rotate in. I mean, that could be. And like I said, we are looking at an environment with no ice where aggro should be absolutely thriving, and it just isn't. So when ice enters the format, and we're already in the trajectory that's not looking good for it, it's headed for the wrong direction. It seems. They had the word universal on wage gold. Would it help having functional reprints of staples, but the universal? I don't. I think it actually makes the problem worse because then you're turning generics into class cards, which means why play the regular class cards? So I think that actually would amplify the problem. Honestly, I think Art of War could be separated into different class cards. Ninja get the +1 effect, Rune Blades get the go again. I don't know who would get the other two effects, especially. I mean, maybe define aggro because aggressive guardian slash brute could. My definition of aggro is on average in your optimal line of play, you do not like blocking with more than one card every 3 turn cycles. That's kind of my definition of aggro. Maybe 2 cards. Every 3 turn cycles, aka 12 cards, you are sending 10 to 11 of them in an offensive manner. Okay. Now, that is including pitching to pay for said cards, right? You're just using them on offense. You're not using them on defense. That is what I would classify as an aggro. But we also have the opposite of that. We have defensive cards that aggro decks can run. Yeah, but that's another glaring issue. So we just got done saying the aggro decks have to have synergies to extrapolate their value, right? And if you add a sync blow into that equation, like take an Aurora deck, what is your brick potential if you add sync blow? It's actually higher. I know you get the filter, but it's actually higher because it doesn't attack, it doesn't have go again, and especially against a deck that blocks you. Like you'll notice that very quickly when you're running Sigil of Suffering. It's like sometimes the card is good when it's good, but man, it is bad when it's bad. Could and should are different. Aggressive guardians should. What about a generic card that's blue, blocks 2, 1 attack with an on hit of when this attack hits, reveal the top card of your deck. If the attack action, add a card in your hand. Card gains go again. I mean, maybe, but it just has to be a card that most aggro decks can use. That's the idea. Like Snatch in Rabble and things like that. Obviously, it's not going to help Dio, but I think Dio's doing just. I don't get it. Why do we need to assist aggro decks more and not remove CYB? It's clearly a bad card design wise. I agree with you. I agree with you. That CYB is bad card design. This problem. I don't want to use the word problem, but this idea or theory that I've presented today. eh, CYB is this much of it, almost none of it. It's just a piece of it. In fact, the whole time I was explaining the thought process, I don't even think I mentioned it. Um, it's just the latest piece of the trend. The fact that you've only gotten 3 generic aggro cards in the entirety of the game of Flesh and Blood that, well, I guess 4 if you count the E Strike, um, that can go in like normal aggro decks. And then here you just have an astronomical amount of mid range or control tools. And I think that We obviously know as card gamers that the bigger the card pool, the better the performance. There's a very strong correlation between those two. And yes, the aggro tools come from the class cards and the talent cards. That is 100% correct. However, they required synergies to execute. Synergies induce a factor of variance. And due to the inherent mechanic of drawing 4 cards every single turn, it is very hard to consistently carry over synergies. Therefore, putting aggro at a minor disadvantage to compare to decks the block. 0 for 2, natural go again. On hit, your next attack gets go again. Generic block 2. Maybe. After playing aggro for almost 2 years in Fab, I feel like I've burnt out on it. It feels like it's either too strong, oppressive, or weak and inconsistent. It just feels bad. And that's what I've shown with the Excel sheet, right? Is that great divide where it was like astronomically oppressive at the beginning of the game, the first half of the game, and the later half it's been very, very lackluster. Maybe this is LSS's goal. Maybe they want aggro to be kind of subpar. I don't know. Maybe. I've been playing more mid range to control this lately. Ended up switching from Viscera to Aurora to Florian. Haven't looked back. I just want aggro decks to be doing 30. Oh, I don't either. Like, that's adding the card that I suggested does not take decks to 30 damage a turn. It's not going to happen. I agree. And that's why we should not unban Belittle. I agree with that. And Art of War should be banned as well. I'm not saying we should unban Art of War. I'm just saying the aggro archetype is lacking something. Why do we believe High Octane should be banned if Dash IO didn't win? Because it can be insta wins and it also invalidates the exact premise that they printed on this ban and is restricted announcement. All these design principles literally High Octane invalidates every one of them. Every one of them. That's that's your answer. Is it obscenely broken? It's a pretty fun good card, but I don't know. Problem with generics for aggro versus control is yeah, but like I don't know. Plunder was too good, sure. They don't have ceiling. Do 40 once in a while and get banned. I mean, that's why you do have to be very careful when like the card that I suggested. 0 cost 2 block, attack for 3. You get 1 or 2 modes. Go again or +1, create a ponder on hit. Like that is it doesn't scale the aggro decks, right? I mean, yes, it provides go again and a head jab, which could give Aurora an extra 3 damage or something on arc lightning flicker whisk combo. Sure, but like other than that, it's not scaling hard. The problem with Plunder Run is the fucking draw. Like you can't be just drawing willy nilly. Ponder and drawing are way different. Way different. They don't have the same attention, even though they are problematic under the hood. I agree. I feel like they have to ban Tome of the Imperial Flames soon after the hunt. I have no clue. I will wait to see the set before I make any predictions. So, this has been a long stream. Um, I've usually been going like 2 hours and we're over 3. I'm going to leave chat open for another 5 minutes or so, and then we'll close out. So if you have anything, please post it in there. I hope that I communicated the idea clearly. I hope I was able to remove as much bias as possible while doing so and conducting my analysis. I know it's not perfect, especially including the data. We had to make some assumptions that are not definitive. There's no way that we can prove them, but I think they were logically sound, and that is the best we can do. And I produced multiple points from several angles to try and justify or invalidate the idea, and ended up coming up with a conclusion that I think could be could be better. So, and even came up with a couple ideas to maybe fix it. Are they perfect ideas? God, no. But I think it's an idea that's worth a discussion in a boardroom, right? Why shouldn't we do this? If you can't come up with a decent list, dig deeper. I genuinely think that premeditate is one of the best generic aggro tools that has been printed. It's just unfortunately hard for a lot of decks. Yeah, I agree. And I tried premeditate so much in Briar, and guess what? It added another layer of inconsistency. It literally said, "Oh, I have to work this shit into the arsenal, and if I draw it, I'm fucked. If I don't have an attack in arsenal." Um, and it really just messed you up sometimes. These streams are low key like philosophers of old. The quorum of people discussing things and arguing for different points and perspectives. I mean, I normally don't do the heavy. I mean, obviously, like the tier list involve a heavy discussion and stuff like that. But this one, it's something I've been thinking about for quite some time, and I really just wanted to shed some light on it. I don't. I don't know. I think it's as people see it. I think I've presented enough points and data to where you have to ask yourself, like, what is the reason I'm playing aggro? And that's the question that I want you to ask yourself: is why are you playing aggro? And if you don't have a real good reason that you're like actively trying to target something for a very good reason and it's worth it, right? Like if your Aurora strategy is to target Enigma, but you're not even beating Enigma, I don't know. I don't know. Like the Fab soccer. I'll take that. I'll take that. I'll take that. Back in my philosophical days, I was more of an Aristotle kind of guy, but we'll take it. We'll take it. Felt like Socrates kind of dreamed a little too much, but I've stopped playing conventional aggro because I don't enjoy the games anymore. I mean, I respect it. I respect it. I respect it. And once again, if anybody from LSS sees this, I hope they do. Or maybe they hear about it, hear the ideas from somebody that watched it. Um, I'm not trying to, you know, I'm not trying to like talk shit or anything like that. All of these videos, all my Twitter posts that like the Zen thing where I'm just highlighting the fact that the shit was broken and it was because we had heard nothing until I did post it. Uh, you know, I'm just trying to provide feedback because if I was pouring the amount of passion and effort into something that you at LSS are doing, I would want that feedback too. I would want those checkpoints from the people that play my game, and I'm just one voice. I I'm irrelevant. But what I can do is I can bring some people together and they can either amplify the point or completely invalidate it. And I'm happy with either one because no matter which one happens, the people at LSS get a better data point and a better decision point. And ultimately, what is the goal? To make the game even better in the best possible version it can be so that we can enjoy an even better game and get even more players, right? It's the ultimate goal. Fi literally showed me the game and made me hate playing just present numbers. Okay, aggro, because don't think, just do. That's it. I think Fab is just not interesting when you're not making blocking decisions, or is at least fun deck I've played, the least fun deck I've played in this game because it's a bunch of numbers and it blocks incredibly poorly. And that's just a play style difference, right? It's just like, what do you prefer? Some people just love the idea of doing offensive things. I don't know what it is about. What's the next event you plan on attending? I think Portland. I think at the end of this month there is a calling in Portland. I will, if I'm not mistaken, that is before Chicago. The two I'm looking at the most is yeah, the two I'm looking at the most currently right now are the LL calling in Chicago and then the CC calling in Portland. And of course, I'll be at Memphis next year because that's a few hours from where I live. Hello, I'd guess 3 slots taken by CNC and Warmo and 3 by War. I mean, probably for most decks. Give me a new Ranger. Ranger's actually the class that's gone the longest without direct support, believe it or not. If they print good generic go again cards, won't Ninja lose some of, yeah, like you don't want to overdo it. Just one, make it majestic. Like, I agree. This is all about a little injection, a little boost. When I say that they're at a fundamental disadvantage, I'm not saying that aggro's dog shit. I'm just saying maybe aggro's at like a 5 to 10% disadvantage. Not huge, but at the highest level, it's a chunk. It's a chunk at the highest level. Thoughts on LL? It was pretty diverse top eight at Osaka. Battle hard. If I'm being 100% honest, I think Kano has 15 tomes. That's what I think about LL. Briar's good. I'm happy about that. But Kano might have a little too much. Lucas Oswald brought blue and yellow somersaults and Starvo. That's 100% the correct play. Too much value. CYB, Oldham, Dio, Viscerai, Chamber. Yep. Hello finals were Kano versus CYB, Oldham. I'll just wait until 2026 for Monarch 3 and Vin's support. I thought it was going to be Vin's time. I was rooting for Vinny. Oh, man, I thought we were there. And we were there until CYB. Of course, she can run cremation and stuff like that. It's just, I don't know. I don't think Vinny's a bad option. I just think there are better options. I think she got way better and she's a serious deck. They're just his better option. All right. I think the disadvantages comes from the recent book banning, etc. And these acts were all tested with books and Art of War. I think that's a Celios problem. I agree. Yep, it could be. We could just be jumping the gun. Maybe they know this. And that's okay too. Because if that's the case, then what they can do is acknowledge it, right? They can say, "We agree. We've been working on this for 8 months now, and Uh, we'll have solutions as fast as we possibly can, but we agree. And then us as the players can go, whew, it's being fixed. And we know they're going to fix it because they're so fucking good at it. Is it going to be perfect? Maybe, maybe not. But we know that they're going to come out the gate swinging. But I just want to thank everybody for joining me. We were close to 200 for most of the stream. I really do appreciate it. I really appreciate everybody being here. I really enjoy these. I hope that something involving the stream gave you value, whether it be entertainment, uh, helped you be a better player, make a better deck selection, make you think about the game a little bit different. Um, I hope um, that everybody gets some type of value from this stream. Which hunted hero are you most excited for? The warrior one. The warrior. Not really an arachnid guy, although 7 of them are kind of cool, but I'm curious how that's going to work. But I have to say the warrior. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Once again, I really do appreciate everybody being here. Means the world. And I will see everybody next week. Thanks, everybody. Take care.